Hi, Will.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine, trying to not to risk myself.
It's hard to do in these days.
Yeah, yeah, everything is about risks. Don't you think that?
Well, I like talking risk. I like tracking risk. And yes, I believe everything in cyber is all tracked to risk.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I just thought that there are so many controls, so many things to do, and I guess that the question is how to prioritize, how to understand what is important and what is not. And I guess understanding your risk is part of the business. What do you think?
No, I absolutely agree. And I think all these things map together, right? So, we have our assets. These assets provide ways for attackers to get in. And so every asset has vulnerabilities, which those vulnerabilities make way for threats, and those threats cause risk. And so ultimately, every asset we can tie back to risk.
Yeah, yeah, and risks are important. So, how do you think we should manage cybersecurity using risks? Because you could just take a list of things to do and just implement it, but there are lots of other frameworks like NIST 2.0 and others that think that you have to think um, using the risks in mind. So, how should companies taking those risks and build the methodology of cybersecurity on that?
Sure. So, the way that we do that is with a risk register. So we put all of our risk basically on a sheet and we rank them based on likelihood and impact. And so this risk register, we keep it updated as it changes. But every organization has this inherent risk. So if we don't control anything, if we don't put any cyber protections, then we have this inherent risk. And so we measure that. And then as we implement these protections, we say, what risk is this going to affect and reduce? And then that way we can measure what is our current risk. And then ultimately, when we're building a cyber program, measure that to what is our goal, what is our target risk. So we'll have our inherent, current, and target. So we're tracking these risks three ways. If we did nothing, all the way to what is good, good look like.
Yeah, and can you give some example? What are the risks? I can think about high-level risk or tactical risks.
Sure. So, the way I see risk is we have, like weather, we have, non-man-made risk and we have man-made risk. And so at the very top level, that's where I think and growing up in the Midwest, we have tornadoes, right? Not everywhere has tornadoes. So, something that might be on a risk register for a company in the Midwest is tornadoes, but you're not going to have that risk, let's say, if you're out in California or places that have earthquakes. And so, these risks can adapt based on where your business is located or, things that you can't necessarily protect against. So, that's why we've moved a lot to the cloud is, because of, weather patterns and things like that, we can actually shift our data between East Coast, West Coast, Central, Mountain, and globally. And so that's actually a risk mitigation for weather and environmental risk.
Yeah, so for each company, you say that you create a list of risks, and in average, how many risks small, medium business should have?
So I would say, on average, even for large companies, I track about 80 different risks. And not everyone thinks the same way. CISOs will think differently, but like one of my clients, their enterprise risk manager views everything cybersecurity as a data loss risk. So in
Hmm.
their risk register, it's only data loss because ransomware is data loss, theft, data loss. So, how the organization wants to see that risk tied to the business. But yeah, on average, I would see about 80 risk to every business.
And those 80 risks, are they high-level risks like tornado or the mid-level risk like okay, ransomware, or maybe there are very tactical risks like you should implement multi-factor authentication, or you should close your um, ports which are exposed to the internet or something like that. So 80 risk is not so much. So how to pick the right ones?
Yeah, so really it comes down to working with a business. So, what is going to resonate with the business leaders? Do they want to see it down to that tactical level, or do they just want to look at something and see where is our business most at risk? So it's going to adapt, and it adapts per company. And so and the stakeholders involved. Some senior leadership I've worked with, some CFOs want dollar value risk. So they want to know it in regards to, let's say, the cyber insurance policy and how much this is going to reduce the risk to the cyber insurance deductible. Other business leaders I work with just want the high level. They're like, just show me where we're risky, and we can start addressing it from the business level. But then, there's others that want the very microscopic view that this server hosting this application is our most riskiest asset. So you have to adapt on how you measure risk per business.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe another question regarding risk register. Some companies think that maybe it's not so important because it's like an advanced control. Does any company need to have a risk register, or it's just for advanced or matured companies?
Yeah, I would say everyone thinks in risk when they're making a decision, right? And it's nice to put it on paper. So, if as a business leader myself, if I'm going to go acquire something or implement something new, I want to know what it's going to cost me, right? So, knowing that risk, that's why, with mergers and acquisitions, we do due diligence because we want to know what's the true cost of this. And so that's a risk, is that you buy something and then find out that you're going to have to put in double your money to get it to where what you thought you were buying. And so they all think in risk, and it's that I think every company should track it.
Yeah, yeah. So going again to the structure of the risk register, just to maybe the audience would like to implement the risk register just after they hear this webinar. So if you think about the different fields, so probably you have the name of the risk. You spoke about probability, which actually is the probability of having this risk, maybe the severity, anything else that should be associated with the risk register?
Sure. So the risk register is, you're going to have that likelihood, the impact. You can actually have mitigation plans tied to it. So, if you're just looking at a list of risk, that's one thing, but you can also track the threats that are causing the risk. Then you can also tie those risks back to the assets and also to compliance. So, as you start looking at risk for non-compliance, so that's why a lot of the compliance frameworks, we call them POAMs, or plan of actions and milestones. A lot of times, if you're not doing a control, then that goes on a POAM. Well, a POAM is essentially a risk register, and
Mm,
this is not being done, so it's creating a risk. So all the controls and the compliance frameworks were designed to protect against a certain type of attack or threat or data loss. And so ultimately, that's how risk registers can get really large, is if you're tracking every compliance deficiency in a risk register. But it can be as basic as a risk name, likelihood, and impact. And then you've got to tie that to something like a business line, a department, people. If one person's in charge of approving purchase orders and they're out, how does the company keep flowing? That's a risk. And the asset that we're tracking that to is actually a person, not to a physical like computer.
and talking about this likelihood and impact, and you want to calculate the severity, is it just to multiple those two values and then to try to to differentiate between the higher score and the lower score?
So this is probably the hottest debate in risk management, right? So likelihood and impact, you have to say, am I tracking this on a 5 by 5 grid, right? Where the bottom left is my lowest, least likely, risk and least likely impact, all the way up to the top right, which is typically in red, which is this is most catastrophic, I'll be out of business. And so with that, when you're only dealing with 25 squares, right, then you're looking at, yes, likelihood times impact. And then you put that on the grid. But there's a lot more complex risk frameworks like FAIR or Doug Hubbard's book on quantifying cyber risk management. I mean, there are so many ways to measure risk, and so that has to become, how do you want to communicate it? And so that's why I said it adapts. Most of our small businesses and businesses that we're VCSOing, they're not going to want the complex, fair dollar value. But I've worked with those organizations, and so that's where calculating that risk, that is the hot topic. That's the debate.
Yeah, so we say it's enough to know how much is 5 multiple 5. This is the
Right.
top mathematics that we need for that.
Well, the tough thing is when you say, is this like the tornado example I gave, is does a tornado happen once a year, right? So are you looking at the likelihood over once a year, or are you
Mhm.
looking at the likelihood over 10 years, right? Are you looking at the likelihood over the next century, right? So that's where when you look at likelihood times impact, it doesn't give you a fully accurate picture. That's why it's probably the hottest debate in risk management.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, real. I think that we all understand what risk register is. I know how to start calculating for all my friends that need it. And thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.